You are listening to UpTalk with Sean Conahan. The gloves are off, and it's time to have a chat.
Welcome to episode 2, everyone, of the UpTalk podcast. Hope everybody had a safe and happy month since we last spoke. One thing I need to tell you guys right off the bat, you're probably expecting to have the interviews with the Nova Scotia Minister of Health and the Nova Scotia Minister of Labour and Advanced Education on this episode, which was scheduled. They actually reached out to me earlier and had to reschedule due to conflict that they had. So we are rescheduling that, and that will be on a future episode of the podcast. Two very important guests for sure for first responders in Nova Scotia. So I apologize for that. However, we have two amazing guests this month. Our first guest that you're going to hear is Natalie Harris, who is a paramedic and mental health advocate in Ontario. She's doing some great things in Ontario right now, and we're going to chat with her. Also, after that, we have an interview with Janice Landry, who is, as most of you will know, if you're on the East Coast, you know her from being a journalist. She also is an author, a noted author, and also a mental health advocate. We're going to have a chat with her about her book and some things that she's doing now. So two very interesting interviews, which I greatly enjoyed, and I think you'll enjoy it too. So that's going to be great. Before we get started, I'd like to also update some statistics for you. As of today, the 16th of February, 12 first responders and 2 military personnel have died due to suicide in 2016. So the numbers aren't getting any smaller, and it's actually, it has been a devastating start to the year. So we need to keep talking, keep the chat going, keep the conversation alive, guys. And our thoughts and prayers go out to all those families and friends and colleagues of those first responders and military personnel who are no longer with us. Want to remind everybody how they can contact me at the UpTalk podcast. You can email me at uptalkpodcast@gmail.com. You can message me on our Facebook page, and you can find me on Twitter at UpTalk Podcast is the Twitter handle. So get a hold of me, please. Let me know what you like, what you don't like. If there's anything that you'd like to hear on the podcast, a guest you'd like me to have on, something you'd like Dr. Robin McGee to talk about, definitely get a hold of me, guys, and continue to share this podcast with whoever you can to try to build the audience. That would be awesome. And one last thing is I just want to, and I should have done this the first episode, but I'll do it from now on. Please just be advised that you are going to hear some content that can be graphic. And other than that, let's get on with episode 2. All right, everyone. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Natalie Harris. You may know her as Paramedic Nat, as I do, from her social media posts. She's an advanced care paramedic from Ontario and a mental health advocate, doing a lot of good work to empower first responders about mental health. How are you today, Natalie?
I'm great. Thank you for having me, Sean.
Well, thank you. I'm good. Thank you so much for coming on short notice. My original plans got a little bit messed up, and I sort of reached out, and you were good to go. So I'm very thankful for that. So
my pleasure.
For those of us, and for me, who's learning a little bit more, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I've been a paramedic in Ontario for almost 13 years now, actually. I'm a mom, and I've also been a professor at Georgian College for about 8 years. And I'm very passionate about paramedicine. But my personal story, I guess, that links to why you've called me is that I suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder as well as depression, and I've been fighting addiction. Happily, I've been clean and sober for 16 months now. So
oh, wow. Congratulations.
Thank you
awesome.
very much. Thanks. But yeah, through the journey of this amazing profession, I got sick like a lot of my peers have. And with that, And I've gone through a pretty remarkable recovery, and part of my recovery is talking and sharing my journey. And as I've gone through this journey, I've been lucky enough to connect with some people that are promoting the bills that are moving forward with legislation for PTSD that we'll talk about more.
Awesome,
yes. But yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell right now.
Now, so are you still working now as a paramedic?
Yes, I'm on the road as
paramedic. To continue on. Perfect.
I am very fortunate that I have been able to, yes, but that has come with I've been very lucky to have the treatment that I've needed.
Right.
I went back on the road in October with a lot of support from my family and friends and peers and my work, and I'm scheduled to take the training coordinator position on March 7th, so I still will be officially a paramedic, but I'll be off the road.
Now, when you knew it was time, you knew there was a problem, which for most of us is far too late. As first responders, we don't tend to look after ourselves or realize that we have a problem or don't like to admit it.
Yes.
But when you got to that point, did you good support from your employer and access to the therapy? Did you have the doors open for you that needed to be? Or
so I again am one of the lucky ones, and that is few and far between from the stories that I've heard over my year plus of recovery. When I was very sick and in the hospital, my lowest point was a suicide attempt, and at the time, my family and friends put my claim through short-term and long-term disability, so I didn't even have any idea of what the hoops to jump through even were with WSIB.
Right.
So my claim went through very quickly, and I was supported right away, and was able to go to Homewood in about 7 weeks after my admission.
What's Homewood?
Homewood is a rehabilitation hospital in Guelph.
Okay.
And the program that I attended there is for post-traumatic stress disorder and addiction.
Okay.
And it's a world-renowned facility, and I was there for 7 weeks as well. It had a lot of amazing groups that were specifically designated for first responders. So I was able to partake in therapy sessions and group sessions and addiction sessions with my peers. So
now,
it was
how long
amazing.
ago would that have been? When would
I was discharged from there last January, so I guess
January 2015?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, obviously the process for you, that whole process, it was a success? You feel it was a great success? Or?
Yes, absolutely. I'm fortunate, when I went into Homewood, I was completely in denial of even being as sick as I was. And that's kind of another testament to how important it is to get help early on, as early as possible, and to get the proper help instead of fighting for getting help.
Absolutely.
So I was very successful with the treatment, so I'm lucky.
Oh, well, that's awesome to hear. No, that's excellent. It's nice to hear a story of...
It is.
So many stories of how things don't work and fall apart and fall through the cracks, but it's nice to hear a story of someone that didn't, for sure.
Absolutely.
And nice that you had so much support. Now, since then, though, how have you found the support as far as, your peers, or now that you're talking about it openly, have you had good, positive support and feedback from the people that know you?
Yeah, overall, I would have to say absolutely. Friends change as these things sort of emerge, and that's kind of, I think, in any crisis situation, regardless of what the cause of it is, sometimes those paths change. And that's okay with me, because as friends have changed throughout this time, I've gained, unbelievably just the most special friendships I've ever known have developed through my recovery after that. So, but support from work, again, I'm one of the lucky ones. I've been really well supported, and I had an event in October called Paramedic Nat's Mental Health, Evening for Mental Health, and my employer was there. So was the...
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, the fire services, the police services, the military were there as well to speak and share and support. But that's not always the way. So that's why I feel
if anything, that's probably rare, I think.
It is very rare. Yeah. And that's why I feel it's really important that I have this special opportunity to keep going and fighting for the people that don't have that support, because it is so rare. And there are so many people out there that don't have a voice. So I feel like it's, you know, it's really my duty to do that, is to keep talking about it. So
I always talk about that. My point of view, my position is that PTSD is absolutely, totally treatable and fixable and curable in some cases, in most cases. And you know, people don't realize that, and they think they have to, you know, carry this cross or carry this burden, or you know, around with them for the rest of their lives, and they don't. They don't have to do that. There's, you know, if they can get hooked up with the right therapy and the right treatment with the proper support, you know, and if they feel safe to have a conversation and just talk to somebody, you know, lives can be saved. I mean, we've seen it. You know it just as well as I do. Last year, you know, 39 first responders and 12 military personnel. Yeah. Already this year, 12 first responders and 2 military personnel. The last few weeks has been disastrous.
Absolutely. It really has.
Every day I look at it and someone else is gone. You know, we've lost somebody else. And it's just disheartening, but it's also motivating to, you know, further the cause and the conversation and just make it as normal as possible to have these conversations, which, you know, 5-10 years ago, nobody would have had. Everybody would be terrified to have these conversations.
Absolutely. That's, you know, for sure.
And that's what keeps me going. That's why I want to do this. I'm on my own healing journey and, you know, just trying to bring everybody with me kind of thing.
And I thank you for doing that, though, and for sharing your story and pushing forward. You know, that was really Claire Hughes is, I'm really fortunate. She's a friend of mine now through my advocacy. Yeah. And one of the greatest things that she said was that, and especially with Bell Let's Talk and everything, is there's a positive momentum that's happening. And that momentum of talking and sharing, and it needs to keep going. And, you know, with the tragedies that have been happening with these lives that have been lost with our peers, it's just been, you know, so heartbreaking and tragic. But I find like they're angels that are keeping this momentum. It's something we don't want to have, but in order to keep their memory positive, and we need to keep fighting for, you know, the results that we're looking for with the legislation that needs to get passed, so that their lives are, and their memory is really truly kept in the most positive way.
Absolutely, for sure.
For all the,
and
for everyone.
We need to talk about this legislation in a second. I just wanted to ask you, though, is there anything else that you're involved with? Like, being in Ontario, are you involved with Temaconter at all, or? Yeah,
so Vince Savoy and I are very good friends as well. We are talking right now about collaborating with certain things. I'm going to be joining him on some of his training courses coming up.
Oh, excellent.
I'm also friends with Sid Gravel, who he's a huge, I shouldn't say grandfather, he'll be like, why did you call me that? But you know what I mean. He's one of the founding fathers, I'll use, for peer support.
Oh, really?
And he's a retired Ottawa staff sergeant, and about 25 years ago, he discovered that he suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder after a fatal shooting of a robbery suspect.
Right.
And since then, you can look online and Google his website. He has published books. One particular is 56 Seconds, and it's a story. It's his story of what he went through, his journey to recovery of PTSD. But he's also very active with the Mood Disorders of Canada and the Badge of Life Canada. And he's helping me to move forward my Wings of Change model. So it's a peer support model that I've launched on February 1st that Sid helped me develop. So that's really where my focus is right now.
Well, tell us a little bit about that. What these Wings of Change, yeah.
So when I came home from Homewood, you know, I was on cloud nine. I was happy. I was like, wow, this is an amazing life. I didn't know there was such thing as life that included smiling or, let alone not thinking of suicide every day. But the one thing that was lacking was that I didn't have the same peer support that I had while I was in recovery.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, there are critical incident stress management teams that do a fabulous job and wonderful job under crisis situations, but I needed something that was regular for me to go to.
Okay.
And I attend 12-step meetings, and I'm quite open about that. and I needed something that was similar. So, and there wasn't anything here that was like that. So I started developing it, and Sid Gravel was connected to me because he heard I was doing this, because he himself had developed a model years ago called Robin's Blue Circle for police officers.
Okay.
So together, we worked together, and I adapted his model and made peer support meetings that are for all first responders, communications officers, healthcare providers, you name it. Anyone that would be in the circle of care,
right.
that and either volunteer or professional.
Right.
And we're working right now to establish a constant meeting in Barrie and beyond.
Okay.
So, yeah, that people can show up to. You don't need a diagnosis of a mental health illness at all.
Right.
It's not to talk about the calls per se or to divulge any patient information, etc. It's a solution-based conversation meeting where I can go, and it's very structured, and there's a topic that's thrown out. Say stigma is the topic. We go around the room
right.
and we talk about stigma, how it affects us, but also how are we dealing with it and how are we getting better. So that's
awesome.
kind of...
How's it been going so far? Have you had any
meetings
good.
So far? So we're going to our 4th meeting,
nice.
But right now it's just with focus group members.
Right.
So when I first started to develop it, I put a call out on social media for people that were passionate.
I saw that.
Yeah, so I was so lucky, and I had 14 people come forward. Actually, I had more, and I needed to actually just kind of cap it off because we really needed to move forward. But
yeah.
And so we get together at the Canadian Mental Health Association in Barrie. The director there, Jim Harris, has been so gracious and kind and supportive and lets us meet there. And we have meetings, and they've been so well received. We've just kind of become a little family already, and it goes to show you how positive these meetings can really be. So,
well, that is awesome. And, definitely a model that we all need to look at.
Thanks.
For sure. And so now on to this legislation monster that we're trying to deal with. I know that provincially we have provinces that are already on board. We have Manitoba, we have Alberta. We have provinces that are trying to get it in the works for provincial legislation, such as Ontario and New Brunswick. And they're all trying to tackle these workers' compensation reforms in order to better protect first responders that have PTSD. Can you tell me a little bit about the federal bill that's trying to be pushed through and trying to be put in?
Sure. So this bill is called C-211, and MP Todd Doherty, who's from Caribou, Prince George, is the main person that's putting this forward. And it's another private member's bill, but this time it's to develop a national framework for PTSD, which is very exciting. Again, it's quite preliminary at this time, but it's, I think, being scheduled for the 2nd reading already.
Oh, nice.
And its plan, in a nutshell, basically, is to examine current services and benefits that are available for people that are experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder or other occupational illnesses, and to specify best practices, examine new treatments and technologies, and to really kind of look into putting money and grants into that field right now.
Right.
So that's kind of what I know about it personally.
So how, I know that I saw that you put some word out there on social media for submissions for anybody who had stories or statistics. What's that all about? What are you trying to build up there?
So I'm very fortunate, actually. In Barrie Innisfil, our MP John Brassard was a firefighter, and he obviously has a very passionate connection to wanting these bills to be passed.
Right.
And when he was introduced to this by Todd Doherty, he was on board right away. So him and I had been chatting ever since I had my event in October. And when this came up, he's like, "Hey, Nat, you know what? We really need to move forward with this." So it was a little bit last minute, but Todd was hoping to get impact statements and stats on PTSD, etc., for an actual, I forget the exact term, but a summary per se that needs to be presented. So I put it out there on Facebook, the power of social media.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for Mr. Brassard, I think I had about 100 emails sent to him in the one night It's just such an overwhelming amount of people that want to, number one, share their story for the first time to start their healing process, but to be a part of moving this forward. So, yeah, I had impact statements from all across Canada that came through. Sean Taylor as well from I've Got Your Back, hashtag I've Got Your Back 911, that campaign provided, with permission, many impact statements as well. So the more the better. In the morning I texted him, I said, you just let me know when you want these emails to stop. And he said, you're basically, shutting down my computer. So we're good right now.
So now, are you still looking for those statements? Or?
Yes. So if anyone still has statements, I will keep them on hold. If you email me at paramedicnat@hotmail.com, I'll keep them in a file, and I'm sure we will be, with not as such short notice, using them in the future. I'll keep them on file, and then I will let people know that have sent them to me when they're being used. So.
Awesome. So along with that, now, as far as everything that you're involved with, how can people connect with you on social media?
So you can find me. I have a Facebook page. I have a couple. So Natalie Harris is my main personal Facebook page, but I also have Paramedic Nat's mental health page.
Right. And
I have Wings of Change peer support page. I'm on Twitter as Paramedic Nat1. That's I don't know the name. That's my Twitter name.
That's right. Yep. Your Twitter handle.
A handle. That's the word.
Term. I'm learning. Yes.
I'm learning. My daughter and my son would know that.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, for sure.
And then if you want to contact me by email, paramedicnat@hotmail.com is the perfect way to get to me. And if you're looking for a copy, which is a free copy of the model of Wings of Change, you can request it through that email as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, before we wrap things up, is there anything you'd like to say to any first responders that are listening that are struggling or wondering about getting help or don't feel like they have anybody to talk to? Or, is there anything you'd like to say to them?
For sure. Absolutely. I know so much what the darkness feels like that you're in right now. But if there is hope in recovery, I'm telling you, I'm proof of it. I thought of suicide every second of every day at my sickest, and I think I stopped counting how many hospital stays I had in the mental health unit. And I'm fighting for you. I know financially and socially that this illness really affects and puts such hardships on you. And just please hang in there, reach out. I know stigma is still very prevalent, but when I started talking, if you find someone who's safe to talk to and you trust, that's when stigma will fall away from you. And even if you don't know me, you can email me and I'll absolutely be there to, send an encouraging word at the least. But
very well
don't
said.
give up.
Very well said. You know what, Natalie, I think you're awesome.
Thanks. I think you're awesome too, Sean.
I think I can't thank you enough for what you're doing. And the world is certainly getting smaller that we're able to, I'm able to touch base with you sitting here in Nova Scotia, and we can get this, on a podcast. It's so much different than it used to be, and
true.
It feels more like a community more than ever.
Absolutely.
And I just again want to thank you for coming on the podcast. And if there's anything we can do for you, getting the word out, please. All you have to do is touch base, and I'll put it out to the listeners on my various pages.
Okay.
And and we'll take care of each other.
That's great. That sounds like a wonderful plan. Thank you, Sean. I really appreciate all the work you're doing as well.
All right, Natalie, take care.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, guys, it's my pleasure to now introduce you to Janice Landry. People in the area will know her as a journalist, well-known journalist, also an author, and now mental health advocate. How are you today, Janice?
Thank you so much. I'm just absolutely honored to be here on the show with you. Great podcast.
Thank you very much. You came up, you stood up to the plate there. I had to scramble a bit, and you were really good on short notice, so I want to thank you for coming on and talking to us for sure.
Well, I worked in news for a long time, so I totally understand what scrambling around is like, and so I felt like I owed you one, had to pay it forward.
Thanks for that. No, for sure. I appreciate it. So just give us a little bit about, for us who may just know you from seeing you on TV, just give us a little bit about your background, who you are.
Yeah, I really grew up in a household with a firefighting father. My dad was a captain with the former Halifax Fire Department, which is now called Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency.
Right.
Dad was a firefighter for like 30 plus years. So I grew up with having a first responder father, and I can remember him walking out the door in his uniform. And, you know, back in the day, this is really an interesting thing for family members of first responders listening. I never really worried about him. You know, he went off to work and he did his thing and he came home. You know, he did his 24-hour shift. That's the way it worked, you know.
Yeah.
And Dad would come back and he never really talked a lot about his work. And I have found in my research for all of my books and, you know, speaking with many first responders that they don't speak a lot about their calls, and that I totally understand and get that now. Sometimes, though, it's important for family members to hear this because they think, well, why aren't they talking to me? Is there something wrong with me or our relationship?
Right.
And that's really not the case. The case is, why would I bring all of this stuff home and offload it onto you? You know, it's already hard enough, and I'm trying to protect my family from some of this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's funny how it works, but it's only after my dad has passed away, he passed away in 2006, that I really started to dig into it and understand why it was that way for so many years.
Wow. Yeah, you're bang on. That's just how it is. I mean, we're trying to still, you know, manage what we see ourselves usually when we're coming home and still trying to process it. And the last thing we want to do really is unload that burden on our family when we can't even manage it ourselves, really. Even though we don't admit it, we have trouble with it ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's important for your listeners to note that everybody's different. You know, everybody reacts to trauma differently, and that's another thing that I've learned in doing my research. There's no set thing that says, oh, if this happens to you, you're going to do this.
Right.
It doesn't work that way.
No.
You know, that's why this group that I'm going to present next week in Ontario for Heroes Are Human at their big Common Threads Symposium.
Right.
The symposium is the largest conference of its kind for first responders and PTSD in Canada. So, you know, through Vince, who's the executive director, Vince Savoya, and he's in my latest book, The Price We Pay, you know, he's really explained that everybody reacts differently and that's okay. You know, that you go to these things and of course there's going to be some kind of an impact. You know, what that range is or exactly what that looks like for everyone varies, right? Just as much as the people do themselves. And that's okay. I mean, what I stop to think about is how, you know, people like my dad and yourself and all these first responders in varying roles, you know, paramedics, fire, police, military, whoever, how can you go to these incidents that we're running away from, the rest of us and the general public? We're running from these emergencies or trying to escape from them. And you guys and gals are running towards these things time after time after time, year in and year out. And that's why, as a journalist and an author now, I try to shine light on you all because you deserve it.
Well, thank you.
In my view, well, you do, and thank you. No, you don't need to thank me. I'm going to thank you, and that's really the primary focus of the books that I do write is always to thank our country's first responders, but secondly, for the general public to understand that it does take a physical and a mental toll.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned books. I know that the latest book you have, The Price We Pay, Stories of Adversity. Can you tell me a little bit about that book? What motivated you to write this book?
Well, that book is really the second in a series, and the book before it is called The 60-Second Story.
Right.
And the 60-Second Story chronicles this amazing story where my dad rescued an 8-week-old baby from a horrific house fire, and Dad did this really almost physically impossible entry into a 2-story building, and he got in hanging off the home's gutter system into the baby's bedroom window, and he was hanging off the gutter system and broke the window with his helmet, and then he kind of swung himself up, and I don't know how he did this, into the window. He didn't have his breathing apparatus on. He didn't stop to put it on. He just ran, climbed up onto the home's trellis system, and then jumped onto the gutter. And he managed to find the infant in sort of pitch blackness. You know, Dad and I talked about this one time only, and he said he literally could not see the hand in front of his face in that bedroom.
Wow.
And so the whole story around the 60-second story is it starts in the Halifax explosion with the responders who went to that, comes through my dad's rescue. And then I tracked down and reunited with the person that Dad saved, who's now a grown man with his own family. It was a beautiful reunion at the end of that book.
Wow, that must be powerful.
It was incredible. It was like a moment that I had played over and over again in my mind and got to live through, and it really was. And I knew that's how that book would end, but here's how the new one came out. Was I was doing all the media promotion for the 60-second story, and I came home one night, and I was on my social media, on Facebook, and I checked my messages. And you know, if you're on Facebook, you can have private messages that only are between you and another person.
Right.
And this guy, who I didn't know, had reached out to me privately, and he said, "Look, Janice," I'm paraphrasing here, "my name is Jamie, and I am the person who caused the fire that your dad almost died in and the baby almost died in." And it floored me. And I thought, you know, I had just promoted the book. That viewpoint, that critical point of view was missing. And I thought, you know, I owed it to this person. He was, at the time, a young boy. He was 8 years old, and he was playing with matches, and he accidentally, and I want to stress to your listeners, accidentally caused the fire. Wow. And of course, it was an incredibly close call. That's why I called the first book the 60-second story, because Dad and the baby, yes, they almost died in the fire. So this guy, and this is where trauma is really interesting and important for us to talk about. Right. The person who caused the fire as a child lived with that guilt and that trauma for decades and wanted to come forward in my new book, The Price We Pay. He's one of the big exclusive interviews to tell other people in their lives that if they're grappling with the decisions in their lives, you know, why did I do this, or why didn't I do this? Right. That you need to talk about it and get it out there and seek help if you need it, or just let your family and friends know, or look for some support. And in him telling that story, he has really helped so many readers. It's it's just beautiful, really.
And that's sort of the other side. No one really thinks of that. They think of the responders, of course, but they wouldn't think, you know, of that child. What does that child have to grow up with? The guilt or, you know, the trauma involved.
That's right. People who are involved in trauma, and I'm not taking away from responders because you know that's my primary focus. Yeah. But we're all impacted by trauma, right?
Absolutely,
so the people listening to your podcast may be first responders, they may be family or loved ones, but they can just be ordinary citizens who've made decisions that have led to something traumatic, and they are still, you know, living with the ripple effect of that, right? So that's part of the rationale for doing this book, is really to help people and get a conversation going.
Well, that's awesome. That's what it's all about, getting a conversation going. I always say it's time to have a chat, and that's sort of my tagline. And because it's time to start talking about this and making it normal, making it everyday conversation, and really trying to unload that stigma that holds everybody back and ends up, you know, with us losing first responders at an alarming rate because they feel they can't reach out.
Well, it's interesting that you should say that, and it's actually heartbreaking because in my book, The Price We Pay, I had gone to Vince Savoya and Heroes Are Human, and they track suicide statistics, you know, first responders who have died by suicide in Canada. And in that book, I really want your listeners to hear this. When my book was published, the stats between April of 2014 and July of 2015, so just over a year, it was 55 Canadian first responders who had died by suicide. Now, to top this off, that's shocking enough. Right. I did a presentation at the New Halifax Library a few weeks ago, and so I went back to Vince Savoya and I asked for the updated statistics. Yeah. In the 6 months since my book was published, this is truly alarming. And why what you're doing is so important. 13 more Canadian first responders have died by suicide. And so at the end of January, sadly, that total is now 68. So what we're doing here today and what everyone else is doing is urgently needed.
It's an epidemic. It's an emergency. I don't know how else to put it. It's just so sad and in my opinion unnecessary, and you know, and for an issue that can be fixed, it can be treated if people know where to go to get help and if they feel safe enough to talk about getting help.
That's right. And I think that the other message, too, is that every person can help in making that difference. Sometimes we all feel like, well, what can I do?
Right.
But we're all, I really true believe, a cog in that wheel of getting the information out there and getting the support services out there and letting people know that that's why the title of this group is Heroes Are Human. No matter whatever we do for a living and how much training and experience we all have, you're people first.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
We're all impacted by what we do, no matter what we do. So I think it's, you should be praised for getting this message out there. And together, your listeners and our loved ones, if we come together, then, slowly we're going to make inroads here, because that statistic to me, it's just absolutely, it's sickening.
It's staggering.
It's sickening.
It is, yeah.
It is staggering. And to me, it is a national urgency. And, we have to call on our governments to put more funding into support services for our first responders.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. And I mean, there's a movement slowly, provincially across the country, and now federally, hopefully with with Bill C-211, and trying to provide resources and making sure that first responders have the necessary support they need throughout their career to help them, so they don't get into a lot of trouble and find themselves in a dark place, like so many of us do.
And that's why next week, when I travel from Halifax to Ontario, to Vaughan, Ontario, outside of Toronto, for this national symposium, I'll be bringing this message to there. And of course, there's widespread movement in Ontario for support of first responders. So I am anxiously awaiting my chance to present my findings at the symposium and to listen to others who also support our first responders nationally at that conference, which is taking place February 22nd to the 26th. So I'm there for 3 or 4 days, going to meet as many people as possible, spread the stories from a hero east, and bring back some of their stories to the east to share with my readers.
That's going to be awesome. So now that the book is done, and the book has been done for a while, so are you happy with how it turned out?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I'm probably my own worst critic, so you don't eat or sleep for weeks on end when this thing comes out worrying about it, because I tried to represent, for example, in the book also a major exclusive interview with Halifax Police Chief Jean-Michel Blais, telling me for the first time publicly that he's been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. He's also one of the speakers next week in Toronto.
Right.
An incredible man showing great leadership in this area nationally as a chief to come out and state this. So I think, we just have to, at all levels, whether we're the chief of police or we're a journalist telling a story or we're the first responder, wearing the BA running into the fire, whatever it is, we all have a role to play here. And collectively, if we come together, I strongly feel we will make inroads and we are making a difference. And the thing that's most rewarding for me is when I get messages privately from loved ones of first responders or first responders themselves thanking me and other writers and journalists for shining light on this. So it really helps motivate me to continue.
Absolutely, for sure. And now I assume I know that the book is probably everywhere. So people want to find your book. Is it in most all bookstores?
Yeah, both the 60-second story and the price we pay. You can get them at Chapters or at Kohl's. And if you like online shopping, Amazon.ca has it, and Nimbus.ca and my Pottersfieldpress.com. You can find it. It's out there, and I really appreciate you asking about that, because I'm not J.K. Rowling. I'm not going to retire on my writing. My point of doing this is to get the book into the hands of people who need to read it.
Oh, for sure. Now, you mentioned about going and speaking at the Tema Contra Gala, so I imagine an offshoot of this book and the first book is that now you're looked upon as someone that goes and speaks about this subject and tells, your story and the stories in the book and helps educate people about PTSD and how it affects first responders. Did you ever think that would happen from this?
Not a chance. And it's really funny, and it's something I actually teach at Mount St. Vincent University, and one of the classes I sometimes teach is public speaking. And I want people to know that despite the fact that I've worked in television, I teach at a university level and lecture, I go out and talk to people, I am nervous right now about presenting next week. So
yeah, absolutely,
it's normal to be nervous. I'm hugely honored and I'm humbled. But, I have to say, when I was a kid in junior high school, I was scared to death of public speaking. And I remember being in grade, it's like, it's 7, 8, or 9. And I had to do this class presentation. And I literally ran into the class crying because I was scared to death to present.
Yeah.
And if I could have told that teenage girl in the hallway crying, fast forward, that I would be speaking nationally at Canada's largest symposium for first responders and PTSD at this stage of my life, I would have said, I don't think so. So, it's practice, and you're never perfect at it. It's an art form like writing, and, I whatever criticisms I can take, I try to learn and I move forward, and I'm not going to stop. I'll just say that.
Well, that's great. I'm certain that you're going to be able to connect with and help many people that are there to hear you speak, and and just need to hear somebody talk about the fact that they're not alone, and they're not, we're not unique in our troubles, that we are a community that, needs to support one another. And, to get that message out any way we can from as many people as we can is how we're going to get this done.
If I could conclude and just say 2 things,
yeah,
I
absolutely.
really want to thank every first responder who's listening to your podcast for the work that they do, he or she does, day in and day out for us. And people appreciate it, and we thank you, and we are here to support you. And that is the bottom line of what my message is.
Well, that's perfect. Now, if people want to connect with you, Janice, how can they connect with you on social media?
Well, I'm on pretty much every social media platform. And that's because when I started teaching at Mount St. Vincent University, my students wanted to contact me there. So it's really, I'll thank them for that.
Right.
But I am on Facebook, and I urge people to find me there. You'll recognize me there. It's a black and white photo with a picture of a beach behind me with a train trestle.
Yeah.
I'm there on Facebook. I'm on Twitter at @JTheCanadian, and I'm also on LinkedIn. Under my name, Janice Landry, and on Instagram. So I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And
you are all over the place.
I am, and I post a lot about first responders and my writing and work, and I'd love to hear from people.
Well, that is awesome. Janice, I think what you're doing is awesome, and thank you for shedding light on first responders and letting other people know through your writing just some of the things that we go through and some of the scenes that we respond to. Thank you very much, and thanks again for coming on here. I want to wish you the best and stay safe on your trip to Ontario, and I'd love to hear about it when you get back.
Well, if you want, and you could, if you want, we can do an update, and I'll tell you what I learned there and bring it back out east here for your listeners.
Well, that would be awesome. So just thanks again, Janice, and until we speak again next time, just be safe and all the best.
I'd just like to say thank you for what you're doing for the community.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's my pleasure.
Take care.
You too.
And now, it's time for Clinically Speaking with Dr. McGee.
Hey, Robin, how you doing today?
I'm well, thank you.
Awesome. Well, last month we spoke about, we just gave a general foundation of knowledge for people about PTSD and some terms. And I'd like to expand on some of those terms in the upcoming months. And one thing I'd like to talk about today that you mentioned is the narrative memory versus the post-traumatic memory. If you can elaborate on that for myself and our listeners, that'd be awesome.
Sure. Well, I think most of us know what narrative memory is. Narrative memory is the kind of memory for stories that we have about ourselves, autobiographical stories. And they can be stories of things that went down that weren't very nice, but
right.
they no longer have the power to upset us or hurt us. They're stories to us.
Right.
So if you were out with a beer with a guy, you could say, I remember I went through that tough time back in high school when I, failed that test. It would be a story to you. So you can tell the story, and it can be about something upsetting, but it doesn't create any fear or distress or anguish in you as you tell it in present time. So that's kind of what we mean by narrative memory. So that's normal memory. So even people have narrative memory for ordinary things too. This is what I had for dinner last night, and we have narrative memory for positive things. This is what it was like when when I got married, or my child was born, or I had that lovely day in the park with my dog. It could be any number of things. So narrative memory is a memory that is told. If we talked about it in neuropsychological terms, we're saying we're telling that story with the front of our brain, our forebrain, our mature, evolved, common sense type thoughts that can help us tell a story like that.
Okay. That makes sense.
Whereas if I were going to talk about traumatic memory, on the other hand, trauma memories are encoded under conditions of extreme emotion, extreme distress, often. And when they are overwhelming to the person, and the memories it is so huge that it can't be processed all at once. And so when it kind of gets encoded in the brain, it's encoded not just in one's recollection, but encoded also in one's body. So what one remembers from those traumatic memories is something so upsetting that if you were to tell the story today, you would have a visceral, a body reaction. So,
oh wow,
someone will talk about, will have a shudder maybe, or a cringe, an inward cringe, or pang of anxiety, or something as they tell the story, or sometimes, outright distress, crying and distress, serious distress as they tell the story. And that's because the memory is encoded not just in the forebrain, but also sort of deep and primitive structures in the brain emotionally. So it's one's emotional system, what we call the limbic system, gets engaged or kicks in when a story begins, and then the limbic system will make a person feel sort of pierced through while they're trying to remember something.
Now,
the other thing about
sorry, Robin, is that similar to? Can that happen with narrative memories as well? As far as I'll smell homemade bread, and it will make me remember times with my grandmother, or things like that people, is that linked at all, the same kind of response?
Well, yeah, so we can have positive body memories too, we can definitely have warm and fuzzy feelings or thoughts about something and have those brought back by sensory triggers. So, but when we're talking about traumatic memory, kind of going back to when it's painful and when it's not nice at all, those memories sometimes can be encoded in an odd or an incomplete way. So for that reason, sometimes people who've undergone traumas, first responders who've undergone traumas, have only a partial memory of what happened. Their memories are fragmented.
Right.
So one of the things that psychologists strive to understand is, this terrible thing happens, and the person doesn't quite completely remember it. They have gaps or a soldier might say, I remember being in combat, but, I don't remember really exactly what happened minute to minute. It's all one big horrible haze. And I'm upset because I know I did something in that haze and I can't quite remember what I did, and I feel out of control. And
which is even more upsetting.
Exactly.
You should be upset, but can't remember why.
Exactly. And so people will also say things like, I have this sudden reaction to the sound of lawnmowers starting, because it sounds just like the guns going off, or that time I experienced the terrible thing. But what happens is their body responds to it before their brains do. So that's, as we said last time, you can be that vet from Vietnam who ends up going under the table when the car backfires in the street.
Yeah.
So what the idea there is that post-traumatic memories can be fragmented, they can be incomplete, they can come with a really vague, icky sense of unease. They can come with a scalding, searing, terrible clarity in the form of a vivid flashback where it feels like you're really experiencing that terrible thing again. And there's variance along that whole continuum. So all the way from sort of mild distress to wild, intense distress. So post-traumatic stress, what we want, when we're psychologists treat post-traumatic distress, what we want to have happen to the person, the client, what we would like them to do is to be able to take the memory that is stored post-traumatically and essentially move it elsewhere in the brain. We want that therapy to be sufficiently effective that what was a post-traumatic memory becomes a narrative memory, and that someone can tell the story of it and not feel that physiological reaction.
Okay, so it's just like you're changing the coding. You're not forgetting it. You're not putting it away forever. It's just that it'll be coded different, so it doesn't provoke those emotional responses or the negative tones that you usually had with it. Like, you'll still be able to remember the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And people sometimes are concerned. Like, sometimes people are concerned that if I do treatment, I will forget. And I don't ever want to forget because I want to respect the people who suffered at that moment. So a good example of that is Romeo Dallaire, the head of Canadian Forces who is in Rwanda.
Right.
So he has refused any kind of treatment for his considerable post-traumatic stress disorder because he said, I want to suffer. I want to suffer because all those people suffered. And
wow.
And what I want to say to him, Romeo, you don't have to live that way. You can tell your story. You can have a perfect memory for all the things that went down there, but you don't have to live with that horrible anguish.
Wow, that's amazing.
Every day. You don't have to do that. It doesn't do the deceased any good for you to be in torment the way you are.
Right.
He feels that he needs to be in torment, but people don't have to be in torment. People can, once people are cured of PTSD, they can then go on to do more in terms of fulfilling their values and their goals with respect to their loved ones or their fellow comrades or their fellow firefighters or whatever, because they've been restored to themselves. So when I say that it turns these things into narratives, it doesn't mean that they become normalized for the narrative that they are. So, for example, if someone were to be in a car crash and your child dies in the car crash, you might have PTSD about that and remembering all the glass and all of the mayhem at the site. But that part of the memory can be healed over, but that doesn't mean you won't still grieve the loss of your child, but you will have normal grief. This is another military example, but I'll share it because I want to share an example of how someone got better, an example of a case in which a military fellow had to shoot a child soldier. And he had the young boy child soldier had pinned him and his group underneath a vehicle and was firing down to them. And so the only way they were ever going to survive is if that child was shot. Wow. So this guy had to and he had to shoot a child. The man in question had a son the same age, so it was horribly traumatic for him. So, of course, he had horrendous PTSD when he came home, and he needed to adjust from that. So after treatment, though, once he was well, and once he kind of fully understood that, he did the best he could in the situation, and it was an awful, terrible, terrible situation to be in, and kind of came to terms with what he'd done and why he'd done it. Once he was better, he was able then to devote his time as a volunteer to children. And so he became a crossing guard at a school because he said, this way I will keep children safe. I keep children safe every day. And every day I do that. I say my little prayer to the boy I killed saying, I couldn't save you, but I can save these other kids. And I'm going to do it in honor of you and in honor of all kids who are endangered for whatever reason. And so here's a guy who found a way symbolically to repair, as he sees it, repair the damage that he feels he did to the world by killing that child.
Wow.
So there's all kinds of stories out there, of people who once, if, for example, people who, in case of firefighters, people who, if felt in some scenario, maybe they were in an interaction in which they felt they failed their fellow firefighters at a scene. Once they're better, then they can join associations. They could go down to the 9/11 site in New York City. They can, they do things to sort of honor the memory of fallen firefighters. They do things to create honor around what happened and to repair it and to even go out and tend the graves of their fallen comrades. Things like that sort of dignify what everybody went through.
Wow, that's amazing that that recovery can be just that substantial, and to be able to go in and do those things that once you would never be able to even think about doing. and to be able to get to a point where you can start to help others again, as well as furthering your own treatment. To be able, I know for me, to be able to do something that helps myself but also helps other people is such a huge thing for me, to gain that sense of accomplishment back, to gain that confidence back that you lost through this whole process. It's very empowering. And
advocacy in itself is a very healing thing.
Absolutely. I want to thank you, Robin, for that story, and we're hoping that you'll give us one of these stories every month, these stories of hope that will end will end each of your segments on, just to show people that this isn't a fairy tale you're talking about. This is real, and you have
real people, real
lives.
Yeah, and like I said in our first episode, I really, really want to get the message out there that people can recover completely, and recover and even go on to even to thrive in their lives. That PTSD is not a life sentence, and people can recover from it completely. Even people who've been through really remarkably terrible things, and so there is a place that people can get to that where they are whole again and healed completely from these things, and these awful events become narrative memory stories. Right. Still powerful stories, still important stories. There's no way, or by turning these painful memories into narrative memory, you're in no way, it's not disrespectful to others. In fact, it can lead to even more respect for the world you live in, to be healed, to let yourself be healed and give yourself permission to be healed, because that's often thing. Where it's tricky, because some people say, why should I get healed when my buddy didn't live or whatever. So
I've heard that one a lot. That definitely pops up a lot with people that have messaged me, and it can't be said enough that how important this is to get the word out, and that it isn't a life sentence, and it can be fixed. Robin, I want to thank you for teaching us about narrative memory versus post-traumatic memory, and thank you for that story of hope, and thank you for the amazing work that you continue to do with me and with others. I know it firsthand, and I wish you a very healthy and safe month, and we'll chat again next month.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Well, all right, guys, there you have it. Episode 2 is behind us now, and I hope everybody enjoyed the episode. I know I greatly enjoyed putting it together. I want to thank Natalie Harris and Janice Landry again for their contributions to the podcast, as well as always thanking Dr. Robert McGee for her valuable information, teaching us this month about narrative memory versus post-traumatic memory. I'd like to leave you with something this month, and I'm going to call it an UpTalk challenge. As I said before, this month has been devastating with the number of first responders and military personnel that we've lost so far this year. So I want to challenge all you first responders to have a chat with either your partner, if you have a regular partner, or find somebody that you trust and make a pact with them that goes something like this. If you ever find yourself in that dark place where you feel alone and you feel that you have no options, no alternatives, and you're contemplating harming yourself, make a pact that you will reach out to that person. You will call them, you will text them, you will reach out to them somehow to let them know that you're there, that you're at that point and you need some help. That way, maybe we can stop something before it happens. So please make that pact. That's my UpTalk challenge. Every once in a while, I think I'll come up with something like this. Make a pact with someone you trust, and that's all I can ask. I hope you guys do that. I'll be doing that myself, and I would invite everybody, all of our listeners, to please do that as well. We need to look after each other more than ever. So if you could take that challenge, that would be great. Not sure yet who's on deck for next month for guests, but I'll update you as soon as I know. And until then, guys, I want you to be safe and take care of each other and continue the conversation.
'Cause we ain't superheroes, we're just trying to make a difference, and the first on every scene. And it's a heavy, heavy burden to carry all this hurting when you can't unsee the things you've seen. It keeps going on. When those sirens are gone, it keeps going on. When those sirens are gone.